Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Kevin here. It's good to see every one of you today, each and every single one of you today. I hope everybody's doing well. Happy Monday. We have started a new week and we have some new week of information to share with you. Well, not we, I. I have some new information to share with you today. And we're going to be discussing further the whole thing of Agenda 2030 and how this is really playing a role in shaping things in the United States. In fact, has shaped things in the United States in ways that I didn't even take time to recognize until I started looking at things in Chat GPT and recognizing how much of our world has already been shaped by Agenda 2030, but how things have also started to shift where we're starting to see more of the instability and we're starting to see some things that may not be as good as we would like, depending upon the pacing of things and who is actually really more in control in terms of what's for the betterment of not only the nation, but also the world. And that's what we're going to get into today. Before I go any further into that, for those of you who are being affected by Hurricane Milton, especially if you've already been affected by Hurricane Helene, this goes specifically to like my Florida people over there. I would like to encourage you all to please do your best to prep, to keep yourself safe, to make sure that things are working right. If you're being told to evacuate, please by all means evacuate. Do not stay in something that could end up costing you a whole lot of trouble, a whole lot of time and money and things like that. We're already kind of seeing how things will turn out when it comes to the lack of funds with FEMA and the lack of support and things that are going on when it comes to people who are in East Tennessee and West North Carolina. Please do your best to keep yourself safe and prepped. And again, if you're being told to move, please by all means evacuate. Do your best to keep yourself safe and make sure that you're looking after yourself. If you know that you're not going to get the support that you need, do the needful and make sure that you support yourself first. It is very vital. Protect your family as well, support your family and everything else. All right, so please, by all means, the citizens of Florida who are going to be most affected by this storm, please do your best to be safe. All right, now we can get into our content. For those of you who are new here, make sure to hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell. Each time you will be alerted that whenever there's a new video, you'll be able to see the postings and stuff that I do there. So make sure that you are able to subscribe and give me some support. And for those of you who are new and old, make sure you hit the like button. Leave your comments below. Let me know what you think as we go further into Agenda 2030. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you all a video that is going to be helpful in bringing an introduction. And then we're going to go into Chat GPT to get more information about more information about the developmental goals. There's a whole lot of stuff that's available, as well as the website for the 2030, and then we'll move on to some other stuff, okay? So let's go ahead and switch out. So this video right here is going to be coming from Hippie in the Suit. So we're gonna start from the beginning or enjoy the video for a second until there's moments where we're gonna have to do some talking. So let me see if I can make it just a little bit bigger so that way you all can be able to see.
Hey all, it's Kaylee. Welcome to Hippie in a Suit, where every week I talk about sustainability. Why, you ask? Because I dream of a world where a global pandemic does not create 50 new billionaires.
Now keep in mind, she says this knowing that this whole thing is, well, not whole thing, but part of the funding is coming from people like Bill Gates. If you know anything about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they were the ones that were able to contribute a significant part. And we'll go into that when we start talking about ChatGPT, but they were able to contribute significantly to seeing a lot of things in the UN go through. So yeah, this pandemic really did build a whole lot of billionaires that we may not have wanted. But billionaires can't be too bad if you're being supported probably by many of them when it comes to the idea of the UN or the Agenda 2030. So just to keep in mind, all right? Let's continue on.
Today, I'm going to be covering the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or as you may know them, the SDGs, Global Goals, or 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I'm going to attempt to give you everything you need to know about them in just 10 minutes or less, so we better get going. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted on September 25th, 2015, universally. Universal adoption means that every single country, all 193 UN member states, agreed. I'm sure you can imagine that getting 193 countries to agree on anything is next to impossible, but that's what makes this agenda so groundbreaking. The reason we saw such broad support and adoption of the 2030 Agenda is that it was built on the groundwork of two previous processes that laid a strong foundation. The first was Agenda 21 that was adopted at the 1992 Rio Earth Summit and laid out a whole bunch of environmental priorities for the planet. The second were the Millennium Development Goals that were spearheaded by the UN Secretary General at the time, Kofi Annan. These were 8 goals targeted at developing countries and mainly focused on human development. So things like eliminating poverty, universal primary education, gender equality, child and maternal health, fighting against diseases, and even sustainability, but at a very high level. So the global community had these two processes, one environmentally focused and one human development focused.
And so we'll talk about, get myself back on the screen. We'll talk about this more as well. Again, this is also going to be part of what has made Agenda 2030 what it is. So we'll go into Agenda 21 as well as the Millennial Sustainable Developmental Goals, just to get the whole foundation of things.
2012, at the Rio Plus 20 Summit, world leaders agreed to bring the two processes together to create a more comprehensive framework that would be relevant to every country on the planet, regardless of its level of development, and to adopt it as a global community. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is referred to as a comprehensive action plan for people, planet, and prosperity. This relates directly to the 3 pillars of sustainable development: social, environmental, and economic, that I talked about in my first video, which you can find up here. Interestingly, the 2030 Agenda also added the notion of peace and partnership to those traditional pillars of sustainability to create the 5 Ps.
We're going to go into the 5P also when we start going into the website of Agenda 2030. So you guys be able to get a full understanding about what each of these Ps mean. If somebody was not familiar with the Sustainable Developmental Goals or Agenda 2030, this would be a good introduction for that. It's in the preamble of the website. We'll look into that later.
People, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. The agenda is made up of 17 goals, 169 targets, and over 230 indicators for measuring progress. So to say it's comprehensive would be a bit of an understatement. In fact, that is one of the biggest criticisms of the agenda, is that it's so far-reaching that it's hard to prioritize and know what is the most important. The 17 goals, they touch on everything from ending poverty, achieving gender equality, protecting the planet, both our land and our water, combating climate change, creating sustainable economies, limiting our consumption, and even good governance and peace. You can see now what I mean by the agenda kind of including everything. But in fact, as I mentioned in the history, this was quite deliberate. It was meant to create a more comprehensive picture of sustainable development. It was also meant to be rooted in a few fundamental principles that were not included in previous agendas. First, it's nature of our world and the interconnectedness between various domains of society. It says we cannot make policies in a vacuum. We have to think about how they affect each other. Second, it's universal. This means that it applies as much to the richest countries as it does to the poorest countries, meaning that it applies equally to every single country, no matter what their situation, no matter what their context. The Millennium Development Goals that came before really focused on developing countries, and that was great. However, this agenda says to every country on the planet, none of you have achieved a sustainable society, and we need to get moving. Each of you have work to do. I like this because it creates more of a community approach, a collective effort in delivering the agenda. And thirdly, it is inclusive. The agenda was adopted by countries, yes, so it's ultimately their responsibility, but it was developed using the results of a 5 million person survey called the My World Survey. And directly in the text, it says that we need to engage all sectors of society in order to achieve it. So whether that be NGOs and civil society, academics and researchers, the private sector, international organizations and community, and of course, governments as well, all of them need to be at the table. And the final
Uh, so just wanted to keep in mind all this other stuff. Like this is all the stuff that they've been talking about. We're going to talk about this fourth one right here that's going to be coming up, and I'm going to be sharing that with you all because I see something that is very key here. The whole leaving no one behind. We'll talk about that too. Hello, Luana. Good seeing you. Good afternoon to you too. I hope everything is going fine. All right, let's go ahead and continue on.
fundamental principle of the 2030 Agenda is leaving no one behind, or starting with the most vulnerable first. This comes from a big lesson out of the Millennium Development Goals, which was while there was progress made in some countries, others fell way further behind. So a lot of the success that happened in the Millennium Development Goals was actually attributed to the economic development of China over that period. And in fact, some of the more vulnerable countries fell further and further behind. So this agenda, the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs, focuses on how you reach those furthest behind, whether that be a country or groups within the country first, so that our progress can be assured to be helping those who are the most vulnerable. As the name probably suggests, the 2030 Agenda will end in 2030. It's a 15-year agenda running from 2015 to 2030. Every single year, we review progress of the agenda at the High Level Political Forum, which is an event that takes place in New York in July. At that event, the global community looks at progress on certain goals and in certain countries and looks for gaps, opportunities, new solutions, and ways to accelerate implementation. We are currently in what's being referred to as the decade of action because we were 5 years into the agenda and only have a decade left to deliver. That was kicked off in 2020, and that happened right around the same time as the pandemic. So this agenda is facing a great deal of challenges as we try and overcome the massive progress that was set back by the pandemic. If there is
So I have some concerns about this, the way that she's talking about this. One of the things that is like really a concern to me is that the way she's describing these things, it's almost kind of like they're making a checklist and they're trying to see how each year they're managed to make progress off of that particular checklist. And on the surface, that all sounds well and good. But then there's some other factors that may have to come in as well, like the current situation that we are facing now with the economy and inflation. Like, do these things? Oh, let me see if I can move that way. Do these things in our efforts to try to make things move one step ahead, each and every day, how are they having some real tangible ramifications that, it may or may not reach 2030 quite yet, especially just because we had the pandemic, because there may be some supply chain issues that could be going on right now that could be affecting us reaching these particular goals. That is my concern when I'm just listening to this just off the bat. The checklist is good. Go into task, go and make sure everything's done each year. Talk about to make sure it gets to 2030. All well and good, but still a process that, if we're not careful, we can lose our sustainability just trying to make sure that we're going off of this checklist and trying to rush things into this particular deadline. It's a concern. Let's let her keep going.
one thing for certain, it's that we need action now. As Winston Churchill famously said, never let a good crisis go to waste, and this applies so much to the 2030 agenda. We have been set back very far in progress, and we need action in order to make that time up and to have good results on the agenda by the time 2030 comes. Not just so we can say we had good results, but because it's so fundamental to ourselves, our planet, and vulnerable communities all over the world.
So again, totally understanding that, totally get that. But going back to what I said before, is this truly sustainable, or is it sustainable? Are you trying to make it sustainable to accomplish the goals for the UN? Are you really taking into consideration how things have truly been affected by certain things that may be going on within, the country's economy? Because what ends up happening is you get so focused on trying to achieve a particular deadline for something that you start trying to skip things or trying to move things too quickly, where there's some things that may need your immediate attention right now, because if not, it could cause other problems. I'm already seeing issues with just by this standpoint of how she's addressing this conversation.
World. One of my viewers mentioned that there's so much information in these videos that a summary would be helpful, so let's give that a try. The 2030 Agenda was universally adopted in September 2015 by all 193 member states of the United Nations. It was the evolution of two previous processes, Agenda 21 and the Millennium Development Goals. It is made up of 17 Sustainable Development Goals that span social, environmental, and economic priorities, as well as 169 targets and over 230 indicators. It has 4 fundamental principles embedded in it: integration, universality, inclusivity, and leaving no one behind. The agenda is reviewed every single year to ensure that we are progressing. We are now in the decade of action, and it is needed more than ever given the progress that we have lost due to COVID-19. I'm going to be making 2 series here on the channel related to this topic in the coming months. One that looks at each SDG and explains what it is and where we currently stand on it, and a second that looks at how the pandemic is affecting sustainable development and the SDGs. So I hope you'll tune in for those. That's it for today. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you learned something, and if you have any questions, leave it in the comments below, and I will do my best to respond and provide resources where you can learn more. As always, I also have a blog post that summarizes this topic, provides links to my research, additional resources for reading, and a couple of organizations who work in this field that you may want to follow or support if this topic interests you. Thank you so much for the support. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. It really helps out the channel. Thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care and keep fighting the good fight. Bye.
Okay, so we managed to hear all of that. Okay, and get myself back up on here. So we managed to hear all of that, right? So all in all, on paper, it sounds good. The whole decade of action thing, it sounds really, really good. But just on a deeper level, the fact that the whole organization is more focused on trying to just get to this action, that it on the surface, to me, from what it seems in my mind, that you're not really being cautious of making sure that the right type of action doesn't lead to more insustainability, because your goal is to create sustainable development goals. So if you're trying to get something done and trying to rush to it by this particular date, how are you doing it in a way where you're not going to just simply 10x something really quickly, where it could be harmful to other nations, whether they're developed or developing. So that's going to be something that we're going to be looking at. So before we get into that, let's see. Let's move here. So please try to get through the 3 Ps. So let's share this tab here. So where we are right now, you guys, we are in the 2030 agenda. Okay, here we go. I guess everybody can see me good. So right now we are on the 2030 agenda website. So we see here it says transforming our world through 2030, the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. So here's the preamble here. This agenda is a plan of action for people, planet, and prosperity. It also seeks to strengthen universal peace in larger freedom. We recognize that eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions, including extreme poverty, is the greatest goal challenge and an indispensable requirement for sustainable development. All countries and all stakeholders acting in collaborative partnership will implement this plan. We are resolved to free the human race from the tyranny of poverty and want, and to heal and secure our planet. We are determined to take the bold and transformative steps which are urgently needed to shift the world onto a sustainable and resilient path. As we embark on this collective journey, we pledge that no one will be left behind. So that is a key word that keeps coming up. I'm going to mention that whole left behind thing very soon. Let me see if I can blow this up a little bit more so you guys can see. All right, that should be a little better. As we embark on this collective journey, we pledge that no one will be left behind. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the 169 targets, which we are announcing today, demonstrate the scale and ambition of this new universal agenda. They seek to build on the Millennium Development Goals and complete what these did not achieve. They seek to realize the human rights of all and to achieve gender equality and the empowerment of women, of all women and girls. They are integrated and indivisible and balance the three dimensions of sustainable development: the economic, the social, and environmental. The goals and targets will stimulate action over the next 15 years in areas of critical importance for humanity and the planet. Oh my gosh, I can't even talk. All right, so the first thing that we have here is people. We are determined to end poverty and hunger in all their forms and dimensions, and to ensure that all human beings can fulfill their potential in dignity and equality, and in a healthy environment. Planet. We are determined to protect the planet from degradation, including through sustainable consumption and production, sustainably managing its natural resources and taking urgent action on climate change so that it can support the needs of the present and future generations. Prosperity. We are determined to ensure that all human beings can enjoy prosperous and fulfilling lives and that economic, social, and technological progress occurs in harmony with nature. Peace. We are determined to foster peaceful, just, and inclusive societies which are free from fear and violence. There could be no sustainable development without peace, and no peace without sustainable development. Partnership. We are determined to mobilize the means required to implement this agenda through a revitalized global partnership for sustainable development, based on the spirit of strengthened global solidarity, focused in particular on the needs of the poorest and most vulnerable, and with the participation of all countries, all stakeholders, and all people. The interlinkage and integrated nature of the Sustainable Development Goals are of crucial importance in ensuring that the people of the new agenda is realized. If we realize our ambitions across the full extent of the agenda, the lives of all will be profoundly improved and our world will be transformed for the better. So this right here is the declaration. Let's see. So I won't go a chance to get into all of this, you guys. This is like really, really long. Some of the stuff you may have to see for yourselves. But let's go into the vision real quick, because the vision aspect is pretty important. So in these goals and targets, we are setting out a supremely ambitious and transformative vision. We envisage a world free of poverty, hunger, disease, and want, where all life can thrive. A world with universal literacy, a world with equitable and universal access to quality education at all levels, to healthcare and social protection, where physical, mental, and social well-being are assured. A world where we reaffirm our commitments regarding the human right to safe drinking water and sanitation, and where there is improved hygiene, and where food is sufficient, safe, and affordable and nutritious. A world where human habitat are safe, resilient, and sustainable, and where there is universal to affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy. This is what leads to the whole green energy thing, green or clean energy. We envisage a world of universal respect for human rights and human dignity, the rule of law, justice, equality, and non-discrimination, of respect for race, ethnicity, and cultural diversity, and of equal opportunity permitting the full realization of human potential and contributing to shared prosperity. A world which invests in its children, and in which every child grows up free from violence and exploitation. A world in which every woman and girl enjoys full gender equality and all legal, social, and economic barriers to their empowerment have been removed. A just, equitable, tolerant, open, and socially inclusive world in which the needs of the most vulnerable are met. We envisage a world in which every country enjoys sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth and decent work for all. A world in which a consumption and production patterns and use of all natural resources from air to land, from rivers, lakes, and aquifers to oceans and seas are sustainable. One in which democracy, good governance, and the rule of law, as well as an enabling environment at national and international levels, are essential for sustainable development, including sustained and inclusive economic growth, social development, environmental protection, and the eradication of poverty and hunger. One in which a development and application of technology are climate sensitive, respect biodiversity, and are resilient. One in which humanity lives in harmony with nature and in which wildlife and other species are protected. So that is going to be it for now. I think may bring this back later, but I think you pretty much got the gist of what this is supposed to be all about. So now let's go here to my chat GPT. You can see my little logo over here. So let's go into there's a lot of stuff that I want to cover in here. So what do I really want to start? Because there's like a lot of things that we can talk about for this topic. So, by the way, as I'm really taking time to figure out where I want to start with, make sure that you hit the like button if you're enjoying the content, and also make sure that you are if you are not subscribed, make sure that you are subscribed so that way that you are able to follow up with the channel. All right. Okay. So the key thing that we want to discuss right now is we'll start with Agenda 21 and Millennium Development Goals. So we'll start right up here, because this is where we have begun the Agenda 2030. So, matter of fact, I'll do it myself. I was gonna do the voiceover, but I think I'll do it myself. Agenda 21 is a comprehensive voluntary action plan that was developed at the 92 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. It was designed to promote sustainable development at the local, national, and global levels by addressing social, economic, and environmental challenges. The 21 refers to the 21st century, and the plan aimed to prepare for sustainable development in this era. So key focus areas of Agenda 21. One is social and economic dimensions, alleviating poverty, changing consumption patterns, and promoting health and sustainable settlement patterns. 2, conservation and management of resources, addressing the protection of the atmosphere, oceans, and biodiversity, and ecosystems, while combating deforestation and promoting sustainable agriculture. 3, strengthening the role of major groups, engaging stakeholders like women, children, youth, indigenous people, NGOs, local authorities, workers, and the business community in sustainable development initiatives. 4, means of implementation, promoting science, technology, education, and financing for sustainable development projects. So, success and challenges of Agenda 21. Agenda 21 was seen as a groundbreaking framework for environmental action, but its success had been mixed. Some local governments adopted the principle, leading to the local Agenda 21 movement, where cities worldwide integrated sustainability into their planning processes. However, globally, progress has been inconsistent, with issues like insufficient political commitment, limited funding, and the complex nature of global coordination slowing progress. By the early 2000s, it became evident that although Agenda 21 raised global awareness about sustainable development, its implementation had been uneven across countries and regions. The initiative did help establish the groundwork for later global efforts such as Millennium Development Goals and Agenda 2030. So now, too far, moved too far down. So let's go up to this. Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs. The Millennium Development Goals were 8 international development goals set in 2000, followed by the Millennium Summit of the United Nations. They aim to address major global challenges such as poverty, education, gender equality, child mortality, and environmental sustainability, with a deadline of 2015. The 8 MDGs. So the first is to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. The second was to achieve universal primary education. 3, promote gender equality and empower women. 4, reduce child mortality. 5, improve maternal health. 6, combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, and other diseases. 7, ensure environmental sustainability. 8, develop a global partnership for development. Success and challenges with the MDGs. Move this a little bit. The MDGs were partially successful, achieving notable progress in several areas. Poverty reduction. The global poverty rate was halved by 2015, a major success largely driven by economic growth in countries like China and India. Child mortality. Under 5 mortality rates fell by more than half, and significant improvements were made in maternal health and access to clean drinking water. Combating diseases. There were major advances in controlling HIV/AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis, with better access to medications and vaccines. However, not all goals were met. Education. While access to primary education improved, qualities and completion rates remain issues, especially in conflicted affected regions. Gender equality. Despite progress in some areas, gender inequality persisted, particularly in employment and political representation. Environmental sustainability. Deforestation, loss of biodiversity, and greenhouse gas emissions remain serious concerns, even as access to clean water improved for many. Overall, the MDGs were credited in driving significant global progress, but critics noted that they were unevenly achieved across different regions. Sub-Saharan Africa, in particular, lagged in several key areas, and the focus on quantitative targets sometimes ignored important qualitative dimensions like governance and human rights. So now this leads into the transition to Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. In 2015, the MDGs were replaced by the Sustainable Developmental Goals, or SDGs, under Agenda 2030, a broader and more ambitious framework that built on the success and shortcomings of the MDGs. Unlike the MDGs, which focus primarily on developing countries, the SDGs are designed to be universal, addressing development issues in all countries and promoting sustainable development in a more integrated way, which is what the lady in that channel was talking about. The SDGs contain 17 goals that aim to finish the work of the MDGs while expanding the focus to issues like climate change, economic inequalities, innovation, and sustainable consumption. In conclusion, Agenda 21 set the foundation for global sustainable development efforts, while the MDGs achieved notable but uneven progress. Both initiatives shaped the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, which aim to address a wider range of issues with a greater global cooperation. The next thing that I asked was, how does the U.S. plan to use Agenda 2030 and the SDGs for the vision of the country by the year 2030? So here's what I got back as a response. The United States has integrated the principles of Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals into various aspects in its domestic international policies, though its approach has been somewhat decentralized and led by different governmental, corporate, and civil society sectors. So the first is, let's go to the key areas first. I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's get to the key areas of U.S. engagement with Agenda 2030. So the first one is climate action and sustainability. The United States has focused on addressing climate change, a central component of Agenda 2030. Through rejoining the Paris Agreement under the Biden administration, the U.S. reaffirmed its commitment to reducing carbon emissions and promoting clean energy solutions, SDG 7, affordable and clean energy. National strategies such as promoting electric vehicles, renewable energy development, and reducing industrial emissions align with SDG 13, climate action, and SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 is an example of domestic policy that aims to accelerate clean energy transitions, offering billions in tax incentives for renewable energy, energy efficiency, and the electric vehicle industry. This also helps to support sustainability goals both domestically and globally. We're going to talk more about the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 because it has come up with some shortcomings that we have to address when we're talking about Agenda 2030, all right? And for the sake of the United States as a whole. All right, so the second thing, economic growth, jobs, and inequality, SDG 8 and 10. Agenda 2030 emphasizes inclusive economic growth and the reduction of inequalities. The United States has set forth initiatives that focus on job creation, especially in the green energy sector, aiming to provide decent work opportunities and reduce economic disparities, SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. Additionally, federal policies such as increasing the minimum wage and tax reforms aim to address income inequality, aligning with SDG 10, reduce inequality. Okay, so number 3, health and well-being, which is SDG 3. The COVID-19 pandemic heightened the United States commitment to global health and SDG 3, good health and well-being. The United States has invested heavily in vaccines, both domestically and globally, through programs like COVAX, which aim to ensure an equitable vaccine distribution worldwide. The expansion of healthcare access and addressing public health disparities in underdeserved communities are ongoing national efforts. Number 4, international leadership and development, SDG 17. The United States has played a role in supporting global partnerships for development, SDG 17, by working with international organizations, non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, and the private sector to address global issues like poverty, hunger, and environmental sustainability. The United States for International Development, USAID, leads many efforts in supporting sustainable development abroad, such as promoting agriculture, education, and democracy building initiative for low and middle income countries. The Build Back Better World, B3 initiative, launched in 2021, is a major effort by the United States and its allies to providing financing for infrastructure projects in developing countries, aligning with SDG 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. A lot of focus on other countries. It's very interesting, as we get more into it. All right. So number 5, gender equality in education, SDG 5 and 4. Gender equality, SDG 5, and education, SDG 4, are key areas of U.S. focus on under the SDGs. Domestically, there are continued efforts to reduce the gender pay gap, increase access to reproductive health services, and ensure women's representation in leadership roles. Education reform initiatives are also aimed at improving access to quality education, particularly underserved communities, and expanding opportunities in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM fields. So challenges and criticism. While the U.S. has made strides towards aligning with the SDGs, there are areas in which it faces challenges, including political polarization and competing priorities at the state and federal levels. Additionally, the country has faced criticism for inconsistent leadership on climate and stability initiatives, especially during the transition between different administrations. However, recent years have shown a stronger emphasis on sustainability, international cooperation, and economic inclusivity. Looking ahead to 2030, the vision for 2030 is tied to both domestic reforms, global leadership and sustainable development. Key priorities include accelerating the green economy, addressing inequality, and improving social welfare, and leading global efforts in climate change and sustainable development partnerships. The U.S. remains a critical player in global efforts to meet the SDGs by 2030, though much will depend on maintaining bipartisan support for sustainable policies and ensuring consistent global engagement. Okay, so the next thing I want to try to get into, because at this time I had no idea how much of our policies of today were in, I don't know why I'm looking this way. I'm trying to check for the comments, but I'm gotta look here. So when I was taking my time to see how much Agenda 2030 has played a role so far, I had no idea how much the Inflation Reduction Act and so many other policies were right in line with the sustainable goals, the 17 sustainable goals. And so I had no idea that the Inflation Reduction Act was also a part of the SDG goals, or that they were meeting SDG goals. So because I had heard so much criticism about the Inflation Reduction Act, and for many reasons, I decided to look into how this Inflation Reduction Act impacts Americans, especially since it has been a part of Agenda 2030. So let's get into it. The Inflation Reduction Act, signed into law in August 2022, has had a significant impact on the U.S. economy, particularly in areas like healthcare, climate change, and corporate taxation. It represents one of the most substantial legislative efforts in recent years to address long-term inflationary pressures and encourage sustainable economic growth. So here are the successes. Climate action and clean energy investments. This is a major thing that has been a focal point, particularly for Democrats, for as long as I can remember, since I've been able to vote. I would say back in 2009, and then started hearing about it more within, like, by the time 2015 came around. But in any case, climate action and clean energy investments. The IRA is widely regarded as the largest federal investment in climate change initiatives in U.S. history, with over $370 billion allocated to clean energy and sustainable programs over the next decade. It includes tax incentives for the production and adoption of renewable energy sources such as wind, solar, and electric vehicles. This investment is expected to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by around 40% by 2030, contributing to the goals of the Paris Agreement. The Act has encouraged companies to invest in clean energy technologies, with early signs of increased investments in EV infrastructure, battery production, and green energy projects. Number two, healthcare and prescription drug costs. One of the key elements of the IRA is addressing prescription drug prices. The law empowers Medicare to negotiate drug prices directly with pharmaceutical companies, a move expected to lower costs for millions of Americans on Medicare. The law also caps out-of-pocket costs for Medicare recipients at $2,000 annually, providing financial relief for seniors. Now, for those of you who were able to be a part of the last live stream that I did, not the last live stream, but it was a previous live stream that I did that was talking about Ozempic. And it was there that one of my subscribers and that person I've known for a long time, Eclectic Tarot, she was talking about how these companies try to make it to where they are creating a monopoly when it comes to like healthcare, while ignoring more cost-efficient ways to get the medicine. And that's because they're trying to cut out the competition by trying to remove these companies or remove these labs and stuff like that, and just not allowing you to know about what is going on with other medicines that could be a whole lot more affordable than the company that they are trying to reduce the cost for as far as healthcare through Medicare. So if you haven't seen that video regarding the whole issue with $1,000 for Ozempic, you may want to check that out, because this will be associated with the whole idea of what we were talking about in that video and how it pertains to what we're discussing in this particular live stream of Agenda 2030. Now then, the extension of the Affordable Health Care Act subsidies have helped lower premiums for many Americans purchasing health care on the market, improving access to affordable health care. Number 3, corporate minimum tax. The IRA introduced a 15% minimum corporate tax on companies with profit exceeding $1 billion, closing loopholes that allowed some large corporations to pay little or no federal taxes. This is expected to raise significant revenue for the federal government, helping to fund the bill's climate and healthcare provisions. Now, here are the failures and the criticism of the Inflation Reduction Act. Number 1, limited short-term impact on inflation. Despite its name, many economists argue that the IRA's impact on inflation is limited in the short term. While it aims to reduce long-term inflationary pressures through investments in renewable energy and healthcare, it does little to address immediate inflation caused by supply chain disruptions, labor shortages, or high energy prices. This is actually what we were having that's what the inflation was all about. That's what it's always been about. But they're instead putting focus on this clean energy thing. That's why this whole thing about Agenda 2030 is so important, because they are showing that they are more concerned about following through with the initiative of the United Nations. They actually deal with certain things that are affecting us right now when it comes to what inflation really is. It comes from the issue with supply chain, labor, energy prices, and other things now that are being added on to the whole thing, including like the certain things with infrastructure and things like that. The more immediate things that it has not been addressed. But let me move on. Hold on, let me see what LaWanda had to say. She said, "You were here for that? You were here for what? Oh yeah, you saw that. Yeah, you saw that particular live stream. Yes. So you see how these things are making connections, right? These things are very important, but this is what we need to be aware of. Okay, so the next thing is electric vehicles, EV tax credits. The IRA provides tax credits for up to $7,500 for the purchase of electric vehicles, but there have been implementation challenges. One major issue is that a significant portion of EVs currently sold in the United States do not qualify for the tax credits due to stringent requirements on where batteries and minerals are sourced. These rules aim to reduce reliance on foreign supply chains, particularly from China, but they have slowed the adoption of EVs in the short term. Automakers and consumers have expressed concerns that the supply chain requirements are too restrictive, potentially limiting the Act's ability to promote widespread EV adoption. 3, corporate tax burden. The new corporate minimum tax has drawn criticism from business groups who argue that it could stifle investment and innovation. Some corporations, particularly in the tech and manufacturing sectors, have warned that the higher tax burden could reduce their competitiveness and lead to job losses. Yes, that is a major thing that is happening right now as we speak. And that's something to really take time to keep in mind. Again, the actual issue of inflation has not been dealt with. All that has done is just find ways to reduce the cost of medicine and try to create innovation for clean energy. But if the tech is not being able to handle, their own finances or their own way of coping with things with the inflation, that leads to job loss, and that affects the whole sustainability goal of maintaining jobs. Small businesses have also raised concern that may indirectly bear some of the costs associated with the corporate tax. as larger companies may pass along higher costs through supply chain. In conclusion, the Inflation Reduction Act has succeeded in positioning the U.S. for a greener, more sustainable future by investing into renewable energy and addressing long-term health costs. However, it faces challenges in delivering short-term inflation relief and navigating the complexities of its clean energy and tax provisions. While it represents a significant legislative achievement, its full effects will likely be felt over the coming years as its programs and investments unfold. And so that is the thing. They're more concerned about making sure that they are being on track with their target goal for 2030 instead of really dealing with some serious issues with the inflation that is happening right now. So and this is going to lead to some other stuff that we're going to be talking about. I want to show you all how we've been talking about the illegal immigration. We have been talking about migration and things like that. But I'm going to share with you all how this whole thing with migration is a part of Agenda 2030. So we're going to take our time to look into that real quickly. And so all this that's going on within our issues with the illegal migrants that are here, and the fact they're even being called migrants instead of aliens or illegal, pretty much, that's also playing a role as to why we are here. So let's go ahead and get into this. So you see those key words right there that keep coming up? Leave no one behind. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the No Child Left Behind Act that George Bush put into law back when I was a kid. I remember the No Child Left Behind Act, how people talked about it and how it was not really as sustainable as people were hoping it would be for the education sector. So we're going to go into that. I want to find out real quickly and be able to share what I have gathered from that, because they do share a common theme. So here we go. The No Child Left Behind Act was a U.S. federal law enacted in 2021 under President George W. Bush, aimed at improving educational outcomes for all American students. It emphasized accountability, standardized testing, and equal access to education with a strong focus on ensuring that underserved students, such as those from low-income families, minority groups, and students with disabilities, receive adequate educational support. So key features of the No Child Left Behind Act, standardized testing. Schools were required to administer annual tests in reading and math to students in grades 3 through 8 and once in high school. The goal was to measure student achievement and to hold schools accountable for student performance. Accountability. Schools were required to meet adequately yearly progress or AYP targets based on their test scores with penalties for schools that consistently failed to meet these standards. 3, focus on disadvantaged students. The No Child Left Behind focus on closing the achievement gap by ensuring that low performance groups, such as racial minorities and students with low income families, received attention. Schools were mandated to provide additional resources and intervention programs to help these students succeed. School choice. Parents were given the option to move their children out of failing schools to better performing public schools, and schools that did not meet targets were required to provide supplemental educational services such as tutoring. Connections to the 2030 and the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals, particularly under Agenda 2030, share the ethos of ensuring equitable opportunities and leaving no one behind, which resonates with the goals of No Child Left Behind. The SDGs are a set of 17 global goals adopted by all UN member states in 2015, aimed at addressing global challenges such as poverty, inequality, and environmental stability by 2030. One of the core principles of the 2030 agenda is the commitment to leave no one behind, ensuring that the most marginalized and vulnerable populations are included in development efforts. Specific connections, education and SDG 4. One of the key SDGs, SDG 4, quality education, aims to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote long life learning opportunities for all. No Child Left Behind's emphasis on improving educational outcomes for underserved populations directly mirrors SDG 4's focus on equal access to education for marginalized groups, especially those traditionally left behind, like low income and minority students. The Leave No One Behind principle in SDG 4 is echoed in No Child Left Behind's goal of ensuring that all students, regardless of background, receive a high quality education. 2, equity and accountability. Both No Child Left Behind and the SDGs emphasize accountability and data-driven progress. The No Child Left Behind use of standardized testing to measure school performance and ensure that disadvantaged students are not left behind parallels the SDG's commitment to monitoring progress through measurable targets and indicators. For example, SDGs have specific targets related to improving educational outcomes for vulnerable populations, much like No Child Left Behind focus on closing the achievement gap. 3, inclusiveness and social justice. No Child Left Behind intentions to focus resources and support on struggling students aligns with the social justice and equity principles of the SDGs. The SDGs, particularly through the principle of inclusiveness, call for addressing disparities in all sectors, from education to economic opportunities, to ensure that the most disadvantaged groups have equal chance of success, which was also a core goal of No Child Left Behind. Successes and failures of No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind brought attention to the achievement gap in U.S. education and held schools accountable for educating all students, particularly those in disadvantaged groups. It ensured that schools focus on measurable outcomes for students from all backgrounds. Failures. Critics of No Child Left Behind argue that the emphasis on standardized testing led to teaching to the test and narrow curriculum as schools focus primarily on test subjects. Additionally, some schools struggle with the punitive nature of the law, as failing to meet AYP targets often resulted in harsh consequences, leading to stress for educators and students. In conclusion, No Child Left Behind Act and the SDGs share a common vision of inclusivity and ensuring that disadvantaged groups are not left behind. While No Child Left Behind focus on the U.S. education system, the 2030 Agenda applies this principle globally, seeking to uplift marginalized populations through education, equality, and sustainable development. Both initiatives reflect the importance of accountability, equity, and data-driven approaches within their respective domains. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why the migrants are here. This is pretty much No Child Left Behind in the form of making these migrants become citizens of the United States. So let's go. Let me see what LaWanda is saying here. In my school district, the students who didn't live there had to go back to their old school. They also made you sign an affidavit saying that the child actually lives in the home or you will be fined. Wow, you would be fined. Wow. Yeah. So that's see that. But what we're seeing right now with this whole migrant crisis is essentially the United States being in that No Child Left Behind. But instead of education, this is being done to introduce people who are deemed as marginalized, and they may very well be. But it's opening their borders to all of them. And oh my God, there's so much we could talk about that. We're gonna actually talk about that more on Wednesday when we go into the migration crisis and how this is affecting the mayors and perhaps even governors, but definitely the mayors of certain liberal cities such as New York City and as well as Chicago, Illinois. You don't want to miss out on that. We're also going to see how more of this not leaving anyone behind is playing a crucial role in straining our budgets towards these migrants while our citizens are suffering. It goes right back to the idea of what people used to say about the No Child Left Behind, where they were trying to bring those that were marginalized up while also not really doing their best to make sure that those who were at the top were really competitive and try to make things more equal. It's that similar thing starting to happen when it comes to this migrant crisis. So I just wanted to point that out. I had no idea how closely related they were. I just kept seeing leave no one behind. And lo and behold, I saw the connection with No Child Left Behind and the SDGs. Found it very, very interesting. So without further ado, I want to talk about really quickly the difference between how Democrats implement Agenda 2030 or sustainable development goals and how Republicans implement sustainable development goals. When it comes to Democrats, they seem to be more on board with the Agenda 2030 because it's a very progressive move. It's a very it's almost kind of like it's trying to create the new future, even at the expense of leaving behind what has made the United States the United States. Whereas when it comes to Republicans, they're usually more focused on specific goals because they are still very conservative. They're still focused on ensuring that these goals help to support the constitutional efforts and certain democratic efforts for the sake of the United States. It's a very different thing. And so we're going to get into that really quickly. And I know we see Barack Obama first. I did do this with certain Democratic presidents and nominees to include Kamala Harris. But I want to get to the Republican first before we start really getting into the Democrats. Okay, so here's the question right here. Has there been any known Republicans that have contributed to Agenda 30? So here's the answer. While Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, are often associated with more progressive internationalist policies, some Republicans have contributed indirectly or directly to the elements of this agenda, particularly in areas like economic growth, health, infrastructure, and innovation. However, Republican engagement with Agenda 2030 tend to focus on national interests, economic pragmatism, or specific areas like energy independence rather than a comprehensive endorsement of the entire UN framework, which is what the Democrats do. So key Republican contributions. So, my battery's getting low on my phone. So key Republican contributions. George W. Bush contributed the Global Health Initiative. President George W. Bush, as the Bush administration, launched the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, in 2003, which has been instrumental in addressing the global HIV/AIDS epidemic. PEPFAR directly aligns with SDG 3, good health and well-being, by improving health outcomes in low-income countries. Though predating Agenda 2030, PEPFAR's ongoing impact on global health continues to contribute to the goals of SDGs. Okay, Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC. Established in 2004, the MCC under Bush's administration provides grants to developing countries that meet certain criteria for good governance, economic freedom, and investment in people. This initiative promotes economic growth, education, and health, aligning with SDG 1, no poverty, SDG 4, quality education, and SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. 2, Donald Trump. Energy independence and infrastructure. Though Trump criticized international agreements like the Paris Climate Accord, some of his policies contribute to SDG-related goals. For example, his administration pushed for energy independence, increasing domestic energy production to be tied to SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, though the focus was primarily on fossil fuels rather than renewable energy. His focus on infrastructure development, particularly through initiatives such as Infrastructure Week campaign, sought to address aspects of SDG 9, industry and innovation and infrastructure. The First Step Act. The First Step Act 2018 was a bipartisan criminal justice reform that aims to reduce massive incarceration and provide prisoners with opportunities for rehabilitation. This aligns with SDG 16, Peace, Justice, and Strong Institutions, which focus on promoting justice and building effective, accountable institutions. Mitt Romney, climate action and bipartisanship. As a moderate Republican, Mitt Romney has been one of the few within the party to acknowledge the importance of addressing climate change, a central element in SDG 13, climate action. He has voiced support for market-based solutions to reduce carbon emissions, like carbon pricing, as a way to combat climate change while maintaining economic growth. The Republican focus on specific goals. While Republicans may not have explicitly championed Agenda 2030, their contributions tend to align with specific SDGs, particularly in areas of economic growth, innovation, global health, and infrastructure. Economic growth and trade. Many Republicans support policies that align with SDG 8, decent work, and economic growth through trade deals, tax reforms, and deregulation aimed at boosting economic performance and job creation. Health initiatives. Global health programs like PEPFAR have long received bipartisan support, contribute to improved health outcomes in line with SDG 3. Energy and infrastructure. Republicans' efforts to improve infrastructure, whether through traditional energy projects or more recent bipartisan efforts to expand broadband access, tie into SDG 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Challenges and criticism. Republican engagement with Agenda 2030 is often limited by a focus of national sovereignty, skepticism of international agreements, and a preference for market-driven solutions. The party's general stance on climate change and environmental regulation can also conflict with many other sustainability goals within SDGs. However, in areas like global health, infrastructure, and economic development, Republican policies have contributed positively to the broader objectives of Agenda 2030. In conclusion, while the Republican Party as a whole may not fully embrace the UN's Agenda 2030, certain policies and initiatives, particularly those related to economic growth, infrastructure, global health, and justice reform, have advanced key aspects of the SDGs. So, With that in mind, let's go into some Democrats and how they have been able to handle um, Agenda 2030, which they are a lot more willing to take on because it's a progressive initiative. So the first person that we'll look into is Barack Obama. Barack Obama laid the groundwork for the United States involvement in Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals during his presidency, 2009 to 2017. His administration played a key role in shaping international policies around sustainable development, climate action, and poverty reduction, areas critical to the SDGs. Climate leadership. One of Obama's major contributions was his leadership in climate change. The Paris Agreement, 2015, which seeks to limit global temperature rise to below 2 degrees Celsius, was a significant step in achieving SDG 13 climate action. Obama's administration actively pushed for global cooperation on reducing emissions and investing in clean energy. He also introduced the Clean Power Plan, aimed at reducing carbon pollution from power plants in the U.S. 2. Global health and education. Obama prioritized global health initiatives, particularly through programs like PEPFAR, President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which significantly contributed to SG3, good health and well-being. His administration also expanded educational programs domestically, particularly through initiatives aimed at providing quality education for all, reflecting on the goals of SG4, quality education. 3. Economic incentives. Economic initiatives. Obama's focus on economic recovery post-2008 financial crisis, particularly efforts at reducing poverty and increasing job opportunities, indirectly supported SDG 1, no poverty, and SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. His Affordable Care Act also worked towards providing equitable health care, aligning with SDG 3. Joe Biden's efforts towards Agenda 2030. Joe Biden, since taking office in 2021, has prioritized the SDGs through his administration focus on climate action, economic recovery, and social equity. His policies echo many of the principles of Agenda 2030. Climate action and clean energy. Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, of 2022 represents the largest federal investment in combating climate change and promoting clean energy, aligning with SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, and SDG 13, climate action. The IRA includes provision for expanding renewable energy production, electric vehicle adoption, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions with the aim of transitioning the U.S. towards a more sustainable economy. Biden also rejoined the Paris Agreement on his first day of office, signaling the U.S. recommitment to global climate goals. His administration has aimed to reduce emissions and achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050, a critical target for SDG 13. Number 2, social equity and inclusion. Biden has focused on tackling economic inequality through policies such as increasing the federal minimum wage and expanding healthcare access through the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. His American Rescue Plan provided economic relief to millions of Americans during the COVID-19 panini, supporting SDG 1, no poverty, and SDG 10, reduce inequality. Global partnerships and development. Biden has continued U.S. efforts in global health, particularly through vaccine diplomacy and support for international development projects, which are key components of SDG 3, good health and well-being, and SDG 17, partnerships for the goals. His administration has provided funding and vaccines to low and middle income countries, helping them recover from the COVID-19 panini. Kamala Harris' contributions to Agenda 2030. As Vice President, Kamala Harris has focused on supporting Biden's initiatives on climate change, economic equity, and healthcare, which align with the SDGs. She has also taken on specific roles in economic recovery and social equity. Climate and environmental justice. Harris has been a strong advocate for environmental justice, which aligns with the SDGs' focus on reducing inequalities and promoting sustainable development. She has highlighted the disproportionate impact of climate change on marginalized communities and has pushed for equitable distribution of resources from the Inflation Reduction Act. 2, support for women's rights and healthcare. Harris has championed women's rights and access to healthcare, particularly reproductive health services, which align with SDG 5's gender equality and SDG 3, good health and well-being. She's also been very vocal about addressing gender-based disparities in wages and healthcare access. 3, international diplomacy. Harris has played a key role in global diplomacy, working with international leaders to strengthen partnerships for development and sustainability, contributed to SDG 17, Partnerships for the Goals. She's also supported global health initiatives, emphasizing the need for equitable access to vaccines and healthcare worldwide. All right, so is that everything that I want and need to share? Okay, so one more thing that we're gonna look into, and I know it's kind of a repeat, but some of this stuff is these sustainable development goals. There are some key things that there's policies that each goal is kind of like supporting. You may have seen that from the other goals that we have been talking about and other policies. So here are just some more, so that way you can keep that in mind. The Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, part of the UN Agenda 2030, are a set of 17 global goals aimed at addressing a wide range of social, environmental, and economic challenges by 2030. The United States, while not formally adopting the SDGs as a national framework, has implemented various policies and initiatives that align with these goals. Below is a list of SDGs and examples of how the U.S. has implemented them in recent years. So the first is no poverty. Example, the American Rescue Plan 2021 under Joe Biden provided significant direct relief to low-income Americans, expanding the child tax credit. You heard that from both Trump and Kamala. Expanding child tax credit and offering financial assistance to families impacted by the COVID-19 panini. These efforts aim to reduce poverty and economic hardship. Related program, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, provides food assistance to low-income individuals. 2, Zero Hunger. U.S. initiatives like SNAP and National School Lunch Program help fight hunger and food insecurity. These programs were expanded during the panini to ensure that that vulnerable populations, especially children, continue to have access to nutritional food. Farm Bill provided funding to address hunger, food assistance, and agricultural support. 3, good health and well-being. Example, the Affordable Care Act expanded healthcare access to millions of Americans, particularly underserved populations, by making insurance more affordable and accessible. 3, COVID-19 vaccine rollout. The U.S. led global efforts to distribute vaccines to combat the panini, promoting good health both domestically and internationally. 4, quality education. The Every Student Succeed Act 2015 replaced No Child Left Behind, giving more flexibility to states, but maintaining accountability for closing achievement gaps and improving educational outcomes. Universal pre-K initiatives. Local and state governments like New York City's Pre-K for All are expanding early childhood education programs. 5, gender equality. The Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act 2009 and efforts to close the gender pay gap are examples of gender equality initiatives in the U.S. Additionally, expanded paid parental leave at both the state and federal levels supports gender equality in the workplace. Violence Against Women Act, reauthorized multiple times to protect women from domestic violence and ensure gender justice. 6, clean water and sanitation. Example, the U.S. Clean Water Act aims to ensure safe drinking water and protect water bodies from pollution. Infrastructure funding for water systems, such as in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law 2021, provides provisions for improving access to clean water in underserved areas. 7, affordable and clean energy. Example, the Inflation Reduction Act 2022 allocated billions to clean energy initiatives, including renewable energy projects such as wind, solar, and electric vehicles, or EVs, to reduce U.S. carbon footprint and transition into a clean energy future. Clean energy tax credits provided to ensure investments in renewable energy technologies and reduce reliance on fossil fuels. 8, decent work and economic growth. The American Jobs Plan and subsequent infrastructure investments aim to create millions of jobs in the United States, many in green industries, and rebuild infrastructure, thereby stimulating economic growth. Workforce development programs. The U.S. Department of Labor initiatives provide training and career pathways to ensure workers are prepared for emerging industries. 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law 2021 invests on upgraded roads, bridges, railways, and broadband, support sustainable infrastructure. They also include support for EV charging stations and modernizing the electric grid. Research and development, ongoing federal investment in technology and innovation through agencies like DARPA and NASA support industry and innovation. I remember that Trump was very focused on NASA, so I guess that goes with the SDG 9, huh? Reduce inequalities. This is number 10. U.S. policies such as the Fair Housing Act and Affordable Care Act aim to reduce inequalities by ensuring access to housing, health care, and education for all citizens, regardless of race, gender, or income level. Racial Justice Initiative. Biden's executive order on advancing racial equity directs federal agencies to address systematic barriers that create racial disparities. 11, sustainable cities and communities. Sustainable cities city initiatives in places like New York, Los Angeles, and Seattle promote green infrastructure, public transit, and affordable housing. Programs like the Green New Deal for public housing seek to retrofit public housing to be energy efficient. Urban development and smart cities. Investments in resilient urban infrastructure through smart grid and sustainable building practices. 12, responsible consumption and production. The U.S. government and corporations are working to reduce waste through programs promoting recycling, circular economies, and sustainable agricultural practices. The Food Recovery Act encourages businesses to reduce food waste. Corporate sustainability. Increasing number of U.S. businesses are adopting sustainable practices, aligning with the goal of responsible production. 13, climate change. Rejoining the Paris Agreement and the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act are significant steps toward addressing climate change. The Biden administration goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2050 aligns with this SDG. Clean energy investments, massive funding for renewable energy projects as part of the federal and state initiatives. 14, life below water. The U.S. policy of the National Ocean Policies and the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act regulate and protect marine ecosystems. Ongoing efforts focus on reducing plastic pollution in oceans. Marine sanctuaries. The U.S. has expanded protection for marine ecosystems such as, I'm not pronouncing that word, Marine National Monument. Life on land. The Endangered Species Act and other conservation programs aim to protect biodiversity and restore degraded ecosystems. Reforestation projects and wildlife protections are central to these efforts. National parks and forest management. Investment in protecting and expanding public lands. 16, Peace, Justice, and Strong Institutions. The First Step Act 2018, so this was under Trump. That's got like one of the few that we've seen in this that is involving a Republican, even though I think PEPFAR is a Republican one, but the vast majority of this is pushed on by Democrats. The First Step Act represents a significant effort towards criminal justice reform, particularly reducing mass incarceration and promoting rehabilitation. Initiatives to protect voting rights and combat corruption also support SDG 16. Now, I find it very interesting that, they're mentioning the First Step Act at the top of it as an example of peace, justice, and strong institutions. It makes you wonder, especially with, somebody that's top cop as like Kamala Harris, like, why is this not an effort that she is actively pursuing? Let me keep going. Immigration reform and human rights. Efforts to create more just and humane immigration systems and reduce human trafficking align with this goal. 17, partnership for the goals. The U.S. engaged in international partnerships through programs like you said, which work on global developments in healthcare and education. The Global Partnership for Education, GPE, is an example of U.S. collaboration with other countries to improve education outcomes worldwide. Public-private partnerships. Many U.S. initiatives rely on partnerships between governments, businesses, and NGOs to advance sustainability and development efforts. In summary, while the U.S. may not have formally adopted the SDGs as a national framework, many federal, state, and local initiatives align with and contribute to the goals set out in Agenda 2030. These efforts reflect ongoing work to improve sustainability, equity, and economic resilience across the country. So, y'all, that is going to do it for today. I want to thank you all for watching me. I want to try to give that introduction because we will see more than likely next week, because I have other things on my agenda for this upcoming week. But more than likely next week, we're going to get into how each of these policies, that has been under, I wouldn't necessarily say they're under Agenda 2030. They're kind of like indirectly involved and yet directly involved at the same time. We're going to see how each of these things have been succeeding and how they've been failing, so that way that we have an understanding of where we stand as a country. But as you can see, as I said before, migration and how this whole process of this illegal migrants coming into the country, they all play a role within the Agenda 2030. So even if they're not telling you that they're not a part of Agenda 2030, it falls in line with that because it meets those sustainable goals. All right. Hello, Eagle Eye Prepping. Let's see what you have to say. I bet if you follow the money on all these acts and plans, you won't find meaningful spending. I guarantee you won't. No. I can pretty much guarantee that you won't. Outcomes seem to continue declining, even with increases in policies and regulation. Right? Exactly. They're not sustainable. Maybe they would be more sustainable if they weren't done to just completely change the culture or to change the way that we are moving as a people, like how the Republicans were doing it. And that's part of the reason why you don't see many Republicans involved with things related to Agenda 2030, because they're more focused on making sure that nationally we are okay, and that we are being, if there's at least something equal or some type of exchange that we are getting out of that, kind of like with Trump and how he was wanting to do the tariffs with China and wanted to promote the idea of the U.S. needing to build upon its own infrastructure and it's being able to produce on its own. When it comes to things involving Democrats, they are not as regulated because the idea is to be more involved with the UN's plans instead of being specifically involved with how is this going to help and shape us for the better. Like even with what you see now with again the migrant crisis, you're seeing how all this money is being given to us, these migrants, to ensure that they have the stuff they need to be able to have a green card or to have housing and things like that. Meanwhile, you have Americans that are suffering with having to pay for all this stuff. And now you have this hurricane issue that's coming up, and the citizens are not being nearly as supported as these migrants are. It's a problem. So it leads you to wonder. So this is why I say we're not done with Agenda 2030. I just want to kind of to lay a groundwork for what we are getting into, because it plays a crucial role with where we are heading now, especially if Kamala gets into office. You know, again, people got you concerned about Project 2025, and I'm sure there's a lot to be concerned about. But we are following the plans of the United Nations, where you have all these people that are coming together to create this new world, this global world. Some people even call it the one world government, even though the UN is not necessarily a government. But you're having all these things being done on a timeline, which is what I said in the very beginning. You're having all these things being done on a timeline, and nobody's really truly checking how sustainable is it really. I mean, it sounds sustainable. It sounds sustainable on paper, but it's not sustainable if you're trying to do everything on a timeline instead of focusing on how these nations are being individually impacted. And we're seeing a whole lot of issues going on with our economy, and I think that's the thing. I do think that they're trying to change the economy to where it is supportive of whatever this particular agenda is, this particular Agenda 2030 thing that they are doing inside the U.S. But is it working to the benefit of the people? Are they listening to the people? And that's the thing. That's the concern about the Agenda 2030. Who are people? Who are the representative officials, from our president to the vice president to the government, and who are they heeding? Are they heeded to the democracy, to we the people, and to the Constitution, or are they heeding to the plans of the UN? That is the primary concern that I had from the very beginning of this stream, as I was listening to that woman give her examples of this timeline. So it's something that we're going to keep in mind. We're not done with this by a long shot, but we are going to definitely put a pin in it and save that for later. We're going to save that for next week. On Wednesday, we're going to get in, like I said, we're going to get into the topic of Eric Adams, the mayor of New York's replacement, which is Jumaine Williams, and how all this is playing a role with the migrant crisis, to include what's going on in Chicago. Everything is related. Once you start really seeing, especially if you start getting into Agenda 2030, which is why I'm encouraging each of you to do your own research on this particular sustainable development goals, and how they connect to a whole lot of policies that have been in place within our government so far. Because once you start getting to understanding I want you all to really keep that in mind. But that's okay. I'm going to call a wrap here anyway. Thank you all for joining me. Remember, if you like this video, make sure you hit the thumbs up. Make sure you give it a like. Make sure that you leave your comments down below. And if you are somebody who's new here, you've never been here before, and you have enjoyed this content, I know that we have a lot of reading here. We promote reading, especially with like ChatGPT or with articles, as well as doing videos for news articles and stuff like that. We promote that here because we want to have an environment of educating you, so that way that you are able to be aware of your environment, particularly if you're here in the US, and that you're planning ahead accordingly, all right? If you enjoy what you're seeing here, make sure you hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell, so the way you are alerted every time there is a new video. Until next time, you guys, I will see you on Wednesday, all right? I will catch you next time. Catch you next video. Bye-bye. Catch you later.